All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Richard.lesperance. I go by the name of my man Richard. Welcome to A Better Lifestyle. Today, I have the pleasure to have Jason Adams. Jason is doing some great work in the real estate industry. Please, Jason, tell everybody a little bit about yourself and we'll get started.
Yeah, well, I have been a real estate developer and entrepreneur for 23 years and based in Oregon. I have remodeled and fixed up and sold probably 150 single family homes. I have, for about 10 years, I was a new home builder. I've built about 200 homes, single family homes. I have owned and renovated 5 car washes. I've owned some small scale multifamily, like in the sixplex, eightplex type size, and I have built a couple of storage units, and I'm primarily focused right now on building some more ground up self storage units and doing some light industrial renovations. So I've done a variety of things and have a variety of experiences.
I wanted to talk about real estate development. I saw in your bio, you say when it comes to real estate development, it's all about your team. What does it take to be a successful real estate developer?
It's a great question. Well, I see a lot of external vendors that we work with. I only have 3 employees right now. I've had as many as 6 or 7, depending on what we're doing. But real estate has a lot of specialty services, from realtors to title and escrow companies, attorneys, contractors, um, you know, uh, marketing services, and of course your banks and your partners. So there's a lot of different groups of people that need to be coordinated to take on larger projects. And I see real estate development as a relationship business, being able to identify these people, get to know them, strengthen relationships, and hold it over time. Long-term relationships in the business world are extremely valuable, or in the real estate development world, extremely valuable.
What kind of projects do you do?
So currently, we have 4 different self-storage ground-up developments. 2 are single level, about one's at 50,000 square feet, one's about 80,000 square feet, and then we have 2 multi-story. One's 3 stories, one's 4 stories. They're about 80,000 square feet and 110,000 square feet. So that's the bulk of our year this year, but we are also pursuing some light industrial renovations where we will, it's existing buildings occupied. We will go in and improve management, renovate the exterior, and improve the bottom line.
Do you do a residential?
Currently, we're not doing any residential. I have a lot of experience in residential. I have, like I said, built or renovated probably 300, 400 homes. But right now, we're focused on some larger projects and incorporating partners in these deals.
Would you say in those different, because you're doing self-storage and other asset class, would you say are there any similarities in for each of those asset classes when it comes to real estate development?
Yeah, so I mean, if you think of real estate development as starting with a bare piece of ground and building something, there's a lot of similarities in the sense of there's the discovery or research what the market's demanding in terms of size and scale and quality, and then we have various planning and zoning process to go to with the various agencies, mostly cities, sometimes counties. And then there's obviously a construction phase where you're building it and and managing costs. That's very similar. Once they get to operations or opening, I think they vary a bit in how they're managed. And ideally, we like to find projects that have third-party managers. And you can do that with things like multifamily and industrial. Car wash space is very different because a lot of it's managed by the owner themselves. And so, that the management can vary, but generally the process from land to finished building has a lot of similarities.
Do you guys sometimes use an existing place and demolish it and reconstruct on top of it?
Yeah, yeah, we have. particularly when we were doing residential subdivisions, we would oftentimes buy an old house on a big piece of land and tear down the house and then build, new roads and new houses. But right now we actually have a light industrial building near the Oregon coast that's about 70,000 square feet, and it's really old. It's really run down, and its useful life is gone. And so we are in the process right now of going through the analysis and financial modeling of tearing it down and building a multi-family, multi-story apartment building on that same piece of land. So that would be our biggest kind of redevelopment of a commercial site.
When it comes to education, if someone wants to get into to that field, like real estate development, what type of education did you get before you started?
I just had a basic business degree from college, and at least where I live, there's not a lot of specialty real estate degrees. It's not a really structured educational process, and I think I've gotten most of my education by spending time with successful developers, experienced. Now, it's not been in an employee role, although that's a path for some people. You can go work for someone. I've tried to partner with these larger developers and learn kind of on the job with them and through them and really listen to their experiences.
When it comes to the process, of doing a project, who do you the people when it comes to the permits and all that, the zoning? What are the several steps that someone has to take, to take a project from A to Z?
Yeah, it's really good. Well, assuming you're going through a permitting, at least here where we live, there's two types of permitting. There's a entitlement process, which deals with use and scale. So think of the big size of the property and parking, and is it multifamily or industrial? There's a lot of at times neighbors input and larger scale planning as what city wants to go where, and we do need to hire typically an engineer and an architect to help design these concepts. It's more of a conceptual approval. And then once that gets approved, we move into actually building permit approval. And that gets into the details of the walls and the heating and cooling systems. And that's heavily the architect and with the various engineers that are employed. We have mechanical engineers, and then of course civil engineers and structural engineers. And then they build the detailed plans, and then those go through a permitting process. So we typically see two stages where we're at.
Does it take a lot of time, to get the permits and all that?
It varies, but generally in Oregon, we have some pretty strict land use laws that really limit what can be built where. And so it's not unusual for us to take 2 years to get through the entitlement and permitting process. We'd love to do it in a year, but there tends to be hiccups and delays and various issues. So yeah, it is a long process, and I think therefore it requires a long-term outlook. The economy and markets can certainly have short-term gyrations, but we try to look into long-term stories, things that we feel like are going to be needed in 5 or 10 years. And the time to go through this is more of a cash flow challenge and not so much a feasibility challenge or a viability. Like the demand will be there. We just got to, get through the process.
So what would you say is the time frame of completion, the project from A to Z for each project, whether it's small, medium, or a large project?
Well, I think if you think of a house, so what's the quickest? When I built houses, at least in our area, we does not require any land use. It's just building permit approval. So if we just want to build a house or a duplex or a triplex, a fairly small scale residential, we can usually get through that within a year, close to a year's time frame. But as soon as we add a land use element, that adds easily 6 to 8 months, if not a little more. And then the building permit or the construction timeline can be longer too. It can take 9 or 12 months to build. And then I'd say, so that's like a couple years. And then if we get into a situation where there's offsites, like we have to improve an adjacent road or build a road, or we have to improve a sewer water line, that can add time on it too. And I've seen, up to another year So generally, the projects we're doing right now, we see between 2 to 3 years. But when I've done smaller scale stuff, it's been, closer to a year to 15 months, maybe.
Have you ever built the condominiums?
No, I haven't built condominiums.
So how do you deal with the cost, like the budget, so you don't get overruns in the project and delays and all that?
Yeah, that's really, really good question. And it's certainly been a challenge the last few years. And I certainly don't have any secret weapons here to, to control this process. But I think strategically, during the planning phase, you can't lock in a contractor. So it's a matter of having somebody that you can stay in touch with and do regular updates. So as our designs and our plans, continue to develop, we like to get feedback. So we stay on touch with pricing. So we don't want to fall out of touch. But once we break ground, we signed contracts that are fixed price for a scope of work, and we issue purchase orders, and we just don't, allow there to be any added invoices. The only way we would have a cost increase is if a scope changed. So if the architect got something in the drawings, or we're digging in the ground and we found more rock than we expected, if there's a scope change, or if we decided we wanted to add something prettier, like a bigger sign, that's what would cause the scope change. But once we break ground, we work really hard to have a good set of drawings. And I think the ability to hold trades to their price is largely a function of a set of drawings. If the drawings are weak and they leave stuff out, it opens the door for subs and trades to add change orders or added extra costs. But if the plans are really well designed and developed and there's very little to anything missing, it's really hard for them to ask for anything more.
Have you ever had any problems with GCs, the general contractors?
Um, we generally haven't had problems with general contractors. We've had some issues with subs at times, not paying their material suppliers. And so there's a process we have called lien releases where we make sure that the material suppliers are paid. So we don't want to get in a situation where we pay the concrete guy for their time and material and they don't pay their supplier, because ultimately, and where we're at, the supplier can lien our projects. So we want to make sure that it's a form of generally the project, but want to make sure that the material suppliers are always paid and up to date, and we don't have to pay them twice. And I had to do that a couple times.
When it comes to financing, are you guys dealing with investors?
Yes, we have equity partners and then bank debt or various forms of lender debt.
Do you have problems getting investors?
Well, I don't know if I'd say problems. I'd just say there is certain appetites, and we're trying to, well, we're balancing, and I guess that's a huge relationship part of the business. We have a network that's a certain size and scale, and as our projects grow, we have to grow our network. And so maybe the challenge, or you may call it the problem, is trying to balance that out. So am I growing my project size and my investor network at the same pace, or if my projects grow faster than my investor network grows, then I have lack of equity. I haven't experienced having too much partners and not enough projects, but that happens too, and it's a balancing act as one develops over time. And a lot of the other than knowing people, investors' appetites change with various market cycles. So if their other investments are doing good and they're feeling good, they'll have more money. And if the other investments are doing bad and they're feeling kind of cynical or resigned or frustrated, then they don't have as much money. So it's, timing that sentiment with our projects is certainly a art.
What would you say to someone who has trouble getting in regards to raising capital?
Um, I'd say it's I mean, it's helpful to have a project. I think it's tougher to get started with an idea. So if you have an idea and you're trying to raise money, it's just challenging. So I'd say go find a good project and have it really well vetted and, you know, assessed, I tend to think really good projects will attract really good capital. However, it doesn't happen on its own. It needs us. And I think at that point, it's all about relationship building and getting to know people. And so it's learning about their interests, their background, where they're from, their families, what they value, what their passions are. The more you get to know people, I think they begin to feel comfortable about giving you their money. And you also become a bit different than the typical transaction manager that's just talking about money.
What are the common obstacles that you face in the project?
During a project, I mean, gosh, I mean, we always hit some sort of a permitting issue, it seems like, or a planning issue where we don't have quite the size or it's going to cost more. Um, and then I think in these new stuff, I think the filling up these buildings is also a common challenge, or I don't know if it's an obstacle, but we always forecast and we say, I think it's going to take 12 months or 24 months or 36 months going into it. And then, and then we'll actually discover what the market is. And there's a pricing element. So trying to find that sweet spot of what's the price that will fill it up at the time frame that we want to. And it becomes a cash flow matter. And if we take too long, then we have cash flow short issues. That's a problem. Obviously, everyone loves doing it quicker. So I think managing the cash flow of a business or developer is key because it takes so long to get to revenue points. And I think that's something over my career I've worked really hard on, is to understanding my cash position, my cash flow at all times, so I can be, prepared to, make adjustments.
How do you deal with downturns? Because we know the when it comes to real estate, it runs in cycles. So how do you deal with that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple points of view. One is I keep a long-term perspective on the industry or the location. I mean, a lot of real estate has to be driven by growth. If you have people generally moving to an area for work or for quality of life or for affordability, those long-term trends don't typically change quickly. Now, if you get in the wrong side of a trend where people are leaving, then it's another situation. So understanding long-term trends is important. Next thing is just staying healthy. That's all, like making healthy choices in my life for exercise, spending time with family, doing things that get me energized, because optimism is such a key thing to hold on to when in down times, because most people are they get pessimistic, and that can be very contagious and counterproductive. And then the third thing I think is, keeping a healthy amount of liquidity or cash. Because developers, it's easy to put all of our eggs in one basket, all of our cash in the deal, but that can be problematic. So my goal is to stay fairly liquid at all times, and that requires bringing in partners to help manage projects. So the times that I've felt, the worst is when I've had low liquidity. I've been, kind of not taking care of myself, and I've had a short-term outlook. And all three of those are kind of things you want to avoid in a slow period.
What are some mistakes that you made?
What are some mistakes? I think during planning processes, in talking to city officials, I've not gotten things documented. I mean, at times people will say something in a conversation and I'll assume it's true, but they either may not lack the authority or they may still have the ability to change their mind. So getting everything documented during a development phase is important. And then I think, I have mistimed market cycles in terms of liquidity, like I've said. So I've had too little cash when markets are turning. And I think, generally speaking, at times I don't ask for help. I just try to figure it out my own. And it's an easy thing for entrepreneurs to kind of let one's ego take over and say, you know what, I'm the only one that can handle this. But in reality, there's a lot of resources and people to help through just sticky situations, whether it's technical or financial or even just like philosophical. Most of the time when I reach out to people that I respect and admire, I get help in ways don't always expect and encouragement that I desperately need.
When it comes to global warming, how do you see real estate developers plan their construction in the future?
Yeah, well, we're seeing it. I mean, we're seeing it with insurance companies right now that really pushes, development in certain directions. But I think um, location, so develop people, so people and their money and insurance companies are going to move away from areas that are more prone to natural disasters. Obviously, we think about hurricanes. You could also think about forest fires. Um, or low-lying coastal areas. So I think there'll be a relocation of people. Also, I think, to the extent warming of climates change, people will move northern in their kind of, in their homes because there's generally less, people generally don't like to be cold. And there's a point of certain areas that are getting to be too hot. So I think we'll see a northern migration of people, and then we'll see people to, kind of higher ground away from major storms. And I think the insurance company is going to be one of the first to kind of push people that way.
What advice would you have for people who want to get into real estate development?
I would go find somebody who's successful in your area and say, "How can I help you?" And I don't want a job. And my goal is to learn from you. And I think there's a lot of people that like that spirit of contribution and learning. And maybe it's just evenings and weekends. Um, but there's always kind of an internship need out there. And I think there's nothing better than a live person to talk to. There are books to kind of learn some basic terms and concepts financially and, kind of technically, but I generally think this is a relationship business. And the quicker one can build their relationships and networks, the quicker the business will grow.
Where can people follow you?
Yes, I'm on LinkedIn. My business is Signal Ventures. If you type in Signal Ventures into LinkedIn, you'll find me, and I'd be happy to take any questions, or I love chatting about this stuff. And that's the best way to find me.